Today we're reviewing a big 4x4. A big French 4x4. Oh dear.
Also a big French 4x4 whose predecessor was basically a hippo on wheels and which was so unpopular that Renault dropped it after about 3 years. Double oh dear.
Also big, unpopular French former hippo-ish 4x4 whose engines have all been killed off bar one of them by emissions regulations.
Dear, oh dear, oh dear. Oh dear. Oh dear, oh dear.
Oh dear, what can the matter be?
So things really don't start that well for the Koleos. And that's not all. To expand on the engine thing, today you can buy one diesel with an automatic gearbox. Although you can get it with front or four-wheel drive, the former called 4x2 for some reason. And while we're on this sort of thing and I've got this information box next to me, I might as well tell you about the trim stuff too. There's only two of them, called Iconic and GT line, and starting in the high 20s. And that at least makes life simple if you're set on having one of these.
Because there's no convoluted French sounding trim name nonsense to wade through.
But it also means that in reality this is a 30 grand car. And that's a lot of money for what is ostensibly a family crossover thing. Look, it's more expensive than everything else by miles, including a so-called premium crossover thing, Volkswagen one. Plus it's much more expensive than the other Renault family crossover on here. Hang on a second, other Renault family crossover?
Well, yeah, that. The first thing we need to figure out is what actually is the point of the Koleos? Where it fits in, that is. And that's surprisingly difficult.
Because while it has a marginally longer wheelbase than most, but not all, of these family crossovers, there's hardly thousands of pounds worth of extra space there. So then you start looking at the other 30 odd grand big SUV type things. And it is a touch cheaper than they are, but then it's also on the small side compared to them. And then if you consider the fact that for 30 grand you are pushing into proper posh small SUV territory, you know, Jaguar E-Pace, Volvo XC40, the Alpha one, it just looks too expensive.
And then, just to make it that little bit more baffling, the Koleos here is based on the Nissan X-Trail, which has 7 seats, and this doesn't. Not even an option.
Renault's numbers also have this as being a smaller boot than the X-Trail's by literage. And I mean, you would never complain about the boot size, it is a big space by anyone's standards. But at the same time, in objective terms, you might expect a bit more. And a similar thing, although it is very big in the back, it's spacious, there's lots of rear legroom especially, there's hardly limo-like space. Like, it's not necessarily a full class up from a standard family crossover.
So, we've spent the last however many minutes establishing exactly nothing about what this car is, but there is a good chance, of course, that you just couldn't give a monkey's about any of that stuff.
It's probably big enough for the needs of most, and you might think that it looks great. Or maybe you've just seen one on a mega cheap lease deal and you just want to know what it's actually like. Or maybe you just like the fact that the word Koleos means testicle in Latin. The kids go out of one and go into another, so to speak. It's quite poetic. I'm not sure I'll keep that in.
Good news for you is that this is absolutely amazing. A revolution in the D-segment crossover segment. And undoubtedly the best, most engaging car I've ever driven, ever. You know what? It's pretty much exactly what you expect it to be. The most difficult thing about reviewing this car is just avoiding platitudes. Like, the diesel is noisy when it's cold and it's noisy when you push it, but it's otherwise okay. And the gearbox is smooth. And because it's a diesel, you get quite a lot of low-end torque with all the noise, so it's punchy.
It just does the job like, without any sort of personality at all. And to be frank, that is the story of the rest of the car.
I mean, it's far from the frump fest that the last Koleos was to drive, he says, while rolling around a corner. But compared to most modern crossovers now, including the Kadjar, it's still soft as fudge. If anything, it's a bit too soft. Now, I do think that a lot of people will like the way it's set up because it's so soft that it does have that comfortable wallowy feel when you're going around town, when you're going a bit slower and you're not really concentrating on the way that it's actually riding. And then you've got like really light steering, so it does generally have a quite relaxed feel, particularly when you're driving in a relaxed way. And then when you combine that with the height of the thing, you do seem to sit noticeably higher than you do in a Kadjar, for example. It can occasionally have a sort of luxury car feel. It can allude to that sense of serenity and refinement that you get, or that you expect, with a big luxury SUV. And I think a lot of people will test drive this and they'll find that and they'll like it. That's not without its downsides though. So firstly, and most obviously, it's pretty wayward in the old handling department. As in, it has a near complete lack of the sort of qualities that you want from a car that's a little bit fun to drive. Rolls all over the shop, it's too noisy, the steering's too light, blah, blah, blah.
But of course, and this too is very obvious, you don't buy this for that.
More likely you're going to buy this to spend lots of time either on the motorway or piddling around town. And in those two places, it can shine. Good refinement, quiet, relaxing, comfortable, decent amount of poke at higher speeds, so it's all right for overtaking. But of those two places, it is better at the motorway stuff than it is around town, because there are certain road surfaces, especially here in the UK, on which this is just too soft, just that little bit too unsettled, that little bit too wobbly. It also has surprisingly noisy suspension. It's quite weird. I've never really noticed it this strongly in a car recently. You'll be hearing potholes more than you're feeling them quite often, which is just a bit strange.
The car I'm driving today has the littler of the two screens that you can have. It's not the worst thing in the world, but you know when you're using your friend's phone and it's different to yours and everything just seems like slightly in the wrong place even though you can just about work your way around it? Well, imagine that, but all the time and at speeds of up to 70 miles per hour. Not ideal. And it's one reason why if we were getting one of these, we would definitely get the upper level one with the bigger screen, which is just designed that bit better. It looks better in the cabin and it is that bit easier to use. And so, trims and that, all two of them. Of course, they're both well equipped. They have to be at this sort of price, don't they? But in fact, they are very well equipped to the extent that really, bottom level, all you need. Navigation, proper climate control, big wheels, banging stereo, part pleather, Apple CarPlay, and loads of safety stuff, including lane departure warning. Hence, partly, why it has a 5-star Euro NCAP rating, which is of course very important for family buyers. So it follows then, the top level has even more stuff. It's a pretty obvious statement, so I'll just stand around for a while you work out what the extra stuff is.
To be perfectly honest with you, I'm struggling with this thing a little bit. It's nice in here, it really is. There's a sense of heft in the cabin. It feels well built. There's a lot of soft, touchy stuff and it's quite nicely designed. It certainly looks and feels like something that's at the top end of Renault's range. And door pockets, it has those, big bottles, bananas, whatever. And again, all that stuff about it being soft and comfy is generally a positive thing. But it's just all devastatingly uninteresting. Like, if you were trapped in a Renault dealership even, I don't see any scenario in which you wouldn't just go to the Kadjar that was parked next to this and buy that for like 8 grand less. Because the Kadjar is only slightly smaller, slightly lower quality, and much more enjoyable to drive.
Of course, being trapped in a Renault dealership isn't that likely. Unless Renault itself built the locks. Zing. So unfortunately, that brings us back to our baffling segment journey at the start of the video. But don't worry, I'm not gonna smack that particular beehive again. What I'm going to say is that whatever this is supposed to be, the bottom line is that if you have about 30 grand to spend on a car, and you ask me what I think you should buy, there are dozens of cars that I would reel through before coming to this one. Even though I quite like it, and there's nothing really wrong with it. It has a lot of pleasant characteristics, and it's certainly not bad, but I don't know, I'm bored now. So are you probably. I think we'll leave it there. Bye. Okay, so if you're still here, thanks for watching. Really appreciate your views, and I'd appreciate it even more if you'd watch the other stuff. I think you'll like that too. And actually, for all I was blasé at the end there, on purpose, it was a narrative device. We did actually run a Koleos for 6 months at Honest John, and I'll put a link below to all those updates so you can read about what it's like to live with in great detail. So again, thanks, we'll see you next week hopefully. I think we're doing an MG of some sort. Look forward to that. Bye!
Hello, today we'll be reviewing a big 4x4, a big French 4x4. Oh dear.